Hello and welcome to How to Build in 2030, our special live event about the future of construction, brought to you by the B1M in partnership with Bluebeam. It's fantastic to see so many of you joining today. It's great to have you with us from wherever you are in the world. Thanks so much for taking the time to be a part of this. Now we have a very exciting, quite an exciting topic to debate today. As you can imagine, it is quite a big topic. As the panelists and I discovered yesterday, this could easily be a 3-day debate, but we're going to try and keep it to an hour. And we are going to try and be quite strict on keeping it to an hour, but do get your questions coming in and we'll endeavour to answer as many of them as we can. If you pop your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom, we will answer them there. If we don't manage to answer them today, we will answer them afterwards via email. I'm Fred Mills. I'm co-founder and MD of the B1M, which is the world's largest and most subscribed to video channel for construction. And I'm going to be your host for today. It's great to see so many of you joining and taking part. Now, without further ado, before we go into a bit of an overview of how to build in 2030 and talk about some of the challenges faced, I'm going to introduce the expert panel that I have with us today. It's fantastic to have such a great group with us, or rather they're going to give a bit of introduction of themselves. First of all, we have Sarah Jolliffe from B1M Limited.
Hi, everybody.
Good to have you with us, Sarah. And then we have James Chambers from Bluebeam.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you, Fred.
And also Xavier de Kestelier from Hassel Studio.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all.
Fantastic. I'm really pleased to have them with us because this is, as I said, a very huge topic of which I know a bit, but not a lot. So it's fantastic to be supported and backed up by experts, which is great. Now, as I mentioned, how to build in 2030. We are this panel debate today is taking place off the back of a new film that we have just produced and released on the B1M. So that's now up and available to watch on YouTube, the b1m.com, and all across our social media. It's called How to Build in 2030. I'm horrendously biased, but for me, it's something that you should go and watch. I think everyone in construction should take 10 minutes in lockdown or amongst all the kind of social distancing restrictions we currently have to watch this film, because I think there's some really important things in there to take in, particularly as we head through not just the next few years, but right up to obviously 2030 as well. Now, for those of you that haven't had a chance to watch this film yet, we're going to kind of just quickly summarize some of the key issues and some of the key matters that we've pulled out of that, so that you can have a flavour for what we're going to be discussing and get a bit of context to the panel discussion that's coming up shortly. Now, the reason why we're looking at how to build in 2030 is because our world is currently facing some immense challenges, and quite frankly, these challenges simply have to be addressed over the next 10 years. The first one, and in my personal opinion, the most important, is climate change. To me, if we don't solve this issue, if we don't treat the planet that we live on better, if we don't have a planet to live on, then debates around how we build our buildings, what good homes and schools look like, how we tackle coronavirus, how we deal with Brexit, all those kind of issues kind of will become irrelevant quite quickly because we don't have a planet to live on. So, the construction industry accounts for 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. Construction and the buildings that we built account for 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So the industry has a huge role to play in tackling this issue. There's also a housing crisis affecting many parts of the world right now. We simply aren't building enough homes fast enough, and the construction sectors around the world aren't able to build enough homes fast enough. There's an incredible amount of pressure and demand on our industry to build more than ever before. But at the same time, we have fewer people coming into construction than ever before. We have a skills crisis, and despite rising populations, despite rising demands for buildings, especially homes and infrastructure, we can't build those things fast enough because we just don't have enough good, talented people coming into the construction sector. So that's a key issue that we need to tackle. Now, for us, there are many issues that the industry needs to think about if it's going to build successfully in 2030. But broadly, we see those coming down into two areas. The first being sustainability, and the second, efficiency. So now, obviously, there are a lot of issues, but for us, broadly, we see it coming down to one of these two things and falling pretty clearly into one of these two areas. Firstly, on sustainability, there's a few different things we talk about in the film, in the video. First of all, top right, carbon emissions and the carbon that we produce both during the construction process, but also in buildings at the end of the day. As I said, construction accounts for 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and we're going to need to tackle that head on by 2030 if we're to continue building successfully and to continue living successfully on the planet, quite frankly. It's going to be pretty tough to emit any kind of carbon emissions from a construction site, and finished buildings will need to be carbon neutral or very close to carbon neutral as well. We also talked about materials. So in the top right-hand section, we talk about moving away from conventional materials like concrete and steel to timber. We also talk about recycling materials. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we talk a lot about reuse, reuse of demolition aggregates, demolition materials, recycling waste materials from other parts of society to bring into construction, so that we're leaning less on natural resources, on finite resources than we currently are. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, again, sustainability in finished buildings, lowering our energy use, lowering our carbon output. This is one example in Norway, the powerhouse system, of which there are many schemes in pursuing a similar vein. So that quest for more buildings than ever before, but with fewer people around, is driving a need for efficiency. Other sectors are driving the want for efficient construction and a more efficient industry. And what that's really giving rise to is technology innovation and automation. So in the top left-hand corner, we're talking about automation and robotics. It's worth saying that robotics is kind of one end of the spectrum. Automation is a broad spectrum from everything from AI processing data for you. But broadly, we see automation coming in to take over manual, labor-intensive tasks that are done by people that could be done by machinery, to free up those people to focus on other parts of the industry. In the top right-hand corner, paperless construction sites. We see that there are some paperless construction sites around now. Some people are moving on this journey. They have taken the leap. But really, for us, we think paperless construction sites need to be the way we do every construction site in the world by 2030. In the bottom left-hand corner, we're talking about off-site manufacturing. So off-site manufacturing is something that's been around for a while, but really because of this context, because of the need for more buildings faster to a higher quality, delivered more efficiently, and that skills crisis and the rise of technology, we're seeing off-site manufacturing, off-site construction be reborn as off-site manufacturing and really come back to the fore. So the idea that we're going to be doing a lot more off-site manufacturing by 2030, it's going to be very, very widespread, is something we firmly believe in, particularly in the kind of panelized construction side where you get the benefits of standardization, but with the adaptability to suit a wide range of construction sites worldwide. And then also 3D printing. There's obviously some way to go to deliver 3D printing at scale. But again, in that context of the need for buildings, the need for efficiency and a lack of labor, we see that context really moving 3D printing on in the next 10 years. So as you can see, there's a lot of issues. There are a lot of things to talk about. We've kind of touched on as many of them, we've acknowledged as many of them as we can in the video. We've tried to broadly focus them around those two areas, because just to make it more understandable for you guys effectively, we kind of see it as sustainability and efficiency. Now, I'm very lucky that, as I said, I know a bit about this stuff, but I'm by no means an expert in all of it, but I am backed up by some fantastic experts on the panel today. So we've got Sarah Jolliffe, who is the energy manager at B1M Limited, one of the world's biggest construction firms, one of the biggest contractors, really leading a lot of major construction projects around the world. We have James Chambers from Bluebeam, who's the UK and Ireland's country manager, country director. James is having a huge impact worldwide on digital collaboration, on bringing those paperless construction sites to the fore. And then Xavier Kestelier from Hassel Studio, who is an absolute visionary and has even come up with concepts to build on Mars that have been shortlisted by NASA. So I'm somewhat outdone by experts, which is fantastic. I'm very glad they're here. It's great to have them involved and on the panel. As I said, please do keep your questions coming in. We've got the Q&A box at the bottom, pop them in there. We're going to start with our own chat first of all, but we do want to hear from you, the audience. So anything you want to ask us, get it coming in that Q&A. So first of all, just turning to the panel, I'm conscious that when a lot of people hear this, life is busy at the moment. There's a lot going on in 2020. Most of us can't even see to Christmas and working out which kind of household bubble we're going to be in, let alone 2030. I mean, what do you say to people who think like that? Do we need to be thinking about this stuff now, or will everything just sort itself out basically between now and 2030? Xavier, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, they're really interesting times, and I think why I think it's interesting times because we can see that change is possible, right? If you would have said a year ago that we could all go and work from home and our businesses would not or collapse from day one, it would have been crazy. You know, it would have been crazy. Nobody would believe you. I would believe you. We're not going to trust our people. We're not going to, and it seems to happen. You know, I've been working in this room since March, and our business is going further and continue winning jobs, continue to deliver jobs. So it is possible. So I think there is big changes possible, and I think that mindset, that's what we all need to think about, that we can actually change things, right? For me, sustainability is the really big one. Climate change is the major one. Really, the number one priority should be on all of our lists. And having seen what we're doing as a world now, continue to live with this horrible pandemic, I think we can make massive changes, right? And knowing that our industry is a third of all carbon emissions, like it's up to us. It's not to other people. Like we all have to look at ourselves, whatever job we have, that we can actually, I think, make a change. So yeah, I think it's a new hope in a way to kind of really, really, really do something because we can make changes.
And do you think that's something that we need to start doing now? It's something we can't wait 5 years.
Well, absolutely. You know, we don't have that much time.
Absolutely. I mean, Sarah, how do you think about this? I know you're working on the energy management side for BAM Nuttall. Is this something we need to be focusing on now, or can we sit back and relax for a bit?
So I think our hands are being forced somewhat because we've got the benefit now of all of the kind of science and better data, better monitoring, all this sort of thing of our planet from satellites or on-ground monitoring of the changes that are happening. It's absolutely dramatic. I mean, I can reminisce about the Blue Planet series and the Climate Change Facts program, the David Attenborough effect, which is kind of used quite a bit to really lift the social sort of perception of what's out there and really take stock of what we're doing to this planet. So actually, when we're sort of presented with this stuff in front of us, our minds are going, actually, we do need to act because we are having an effect. Whereas previously, without that sort of filter, we've not had the ability to conceptualize about the scale of this planet and our effect on it. So for me, I think we're into a corner. We're pretty much a rock and a hard place as a species now. And if we don't act this decade, I think we're all going to find ourselves out of a job and probably out of an existence. So it sounds quite alarmist, I know, but it's that we're not very good at thinking long term as an animal. That's the problem. It's day to day. So yeah, that's what I think.
So all good. We needed a bit of cheering up on a Wednesday afternoon.
I'm an optimist. I'm an absolute optimist. Trust me.
I mean, James, how do you feel about this? I know you're looking at it from a different perspective, the digital collaboration perspective. What do you think? Is this something we need to act on quite quickly, or it's 10 years, isn't it?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think to echo what Xavier and Sarah have said, we are being forced into this. The pandemic has almost accelerated our need for working smarter, working better, working cleaner. It's also the data, I think, was a great point that Sarah just made as well. We're in an amazing position now where we are collecting more data because of previous initiatives like BIM and ISO and PAS and everything else, where we know now that a building green costs less over a lifetime. We know it costs 10% less to build green. We know that you can operate a building 8 to 10% cheaper over a lifetime. Like, we have data now to back up why we have to do this and we need to do this. And I think, yeah, we're responsible for a huge amount of the carbon emissions, which is alarming, but there are other amazing stats in terms of, I think on average, it's something between 13 and 15% of materials on site go unused and go directly to landfill, which is alarming as well when we think about it. But I think we're living in a world now where the audience is way more aware of that, and it becomes much more of a talking point, not just where in the past it was a nice consideration. I think now we're building to these standards and these codes, and the world is more aware of that. So I think being more sustainable, being more green, being more aware, being more conscious is something that is now not just a nice to have. It's something that people are. It's a serious consideration. It's part of the remit and the scope in a lot of cases.
I completely agree. I think you're right. I think all of you have touched on it. Society is much more generally aware now, and I think it's probably wrong to point to a specific moment, but I think Sarah probably hit the nail on the head a little bit. For me, the David Attenborough thing on Netflix, they put a documentary out to 195 million subscribers that went beyond the politics and the debate and said, look, these are the facts. And those kind of overlays of rainforest disappearing and the impact there was, for me, that was a real moment. And I remember watching that feeling sad and then angry and then motivated. And I think a lot of people have probably been through that task as well. I know Xavier probably answered this already with mentioning climate change, but we talk about a lot of issues in the video and in the film. We talk about all different things that the world is facing. But I wonder if James and Sarah, you had to pick one as the biggest issue, the most important issue that we need to crack by 2030, what would you say?
Well, it's climate change, right? that's the one.
I think Xavier and I are both voting for climate change.
But I think the way to do it as well is by education. I think you mentioned the documentary, right? One of the things we're doing at the moment is we're trying to construct more with solid timber, right? But the gap I found is that we as designers, and one of them, we're not educated, we're not brought up by thinking that way. So we need to be educated by it. So one of the ways I've done in our studio is I've invited experts from all over the world to talk about timber construction. And I took 20 of our best designers and give them a short course on how to actually build with timber and how to kind of also be able to sell it, right? How to convince our clients to do it, because our clients also don't know, right? Why would they know? So they are eager to learn as well. So it's really about educating ourselves and educating everybody around us to make sure we go in that direction.
Sorry, James.
You go next, Sarah. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think efficiency as a word could definitely be this process coming from someone who works in the built environment, the heavy stuff, the civils infrastructure. It is painfully slow. It's geological timescales, some of these projects, and that has to change. It's ridiculous, and by the time, I think I mentioned in the video as well, that by the time these projects come to fruition, they're actually getting built and being commissioned in a dead technology state. So the stuff that's going into Crossrail potentially, which is going to be obsolete by the time it becomes active. It's a project that was designed in the early 2000s. It wasn't, or some of it was designed in the 10s. It's ridiculous, so that process has to be sped up. And that goes hand in hand with everything you touched on in the video, with the concepts of modularization and the speed of the build, robotics and all of that. So I think it really nicely complements what we're trying to achieve. So in a word, efficiency for me would be where we need to be.
Sarah stole my word. I should know.
Sorry, James.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a combination of sort of sustainability and efficiency to me. That we're in the fastest growing population we've ever been in. There's an increased demand for everything, comfort, spending more time. We're spending more and more time inside built environments or needing to connect to built environments. The world needs this. Like, this isn't just a problem that is a bit of a hiccup. This is a problem that is needed by the world. So I think sustainability element and the efficiency side of it, we use words like digitalization and people should say, oh yeah, no, we do that. Every company on average is still spending between 27 and 50,000 pounds or dollars per year or per project on printing, 5 to 10,000 sheets of paper. I mean, and these aren't big things. These are things that we should be doing now. We should be doing years ago. We should be doing tomorrow. So those are the big buzzwords to me, because they are tangible things happening right in front of us that should be impacting now.
Absolutely. I guess going back to the kind of first question we talked about, whether or not this is urgent, a lot of major infrastructure projects and major construction projects that will be around shaping our lives in 2030 are being designed and planned today, right now. So making sure we do invest at this stage and get things right is critically important. I'm coming back to the materials.
It's not far. It's not. Everybody's like, oh, that's a decade and we'll be driving around in hover cars and blah, blah, blah. But think how long the iPad came out, how long ago. Everybody thinks that was like a year or two ago. It's 12, 14 years when the iPad came out. So 10 years is nothing. It's going to be here tomorrow.
Absolutely. I think we've got that experience on Facebook of here's this photo of you from 2010, and we all go, what on earth did you, what do you mean it was 10 years ago? So that's, yeah, completely, it's no time at all. I mean, coming back to the material side, we talk in the film about, really moving away from concrete and steel, which feels incredibly radical. It feels like a great big departure. And I think, Xavier touched on it beautifully, that, the barrier we're coming up against is this kind of lack of knowledge around timber, but also kind of a misconception around timber and how it's used. I mean, is this radical shift we're talking about with materials, is it something that's going to become possible? I know it's being pushed at the moment, but there's that kind of hesitation. But will the next 10 years really change that? Do you see us genuinely moving away from concrete and steel in a big way by 2030?
I don't even think we're moving away from concrete. I think it's moving into better ways of building with better and smarter materials. Because timber, I agree, is immense and epic, and I love the work that's being done with it. But materials advancements in other areas, like more porous concrete to help with absorbing pollution. I think Skanska has developed their green concrete with a 50% reduction in carbon emissions right now. So again, I think that stuff is here now. It's just, I think, Xavier, you said it best, it's education. People think this stuff is, Star Trek and beyond, and it's not. It's here and now, and it's being used now. I mean, we have so many timber buildings that we can prove. And again, I think it comes back to we're in a world that now ingests data and likes to be proved things. We can now prove why timber construction or using these better, more advanced materials are going to have a greater ROI on the bottom line, are going to have a bigger impact on lives and sustainability. So I think we're there, but we've got to educate people, and we've got the capabilities doing that.
It's also about kind of taking better care of the buildings we already have, right? Retrofitting buildings, being able to kind of take the building stock we have and be clever about it, about the materials that put in it, being able to recycle materials from existing buildings and retrofit them. I think that's we should really start thinking about that much more.
Definitely. If I can add as well, I think the education piece, as you said there, James, it's fundamental. We're dealing with, people who actually deliver the projects. So project managers or agents that have been doing the jobs for decades, and there is somewhat of a reluctance to change without due consideration for the education side, and that's where our roles come in quite strongly. If we can really make a point about communicating to people, really go out of our way just to bring this stuff to them. I don't think there's many walls. These people, you talk, they're human beings as well. They're quite receptive to doing things in a different way. It's just they need to be shown that it works. They need to be shown that it's profitable, frankly, because the industry, money is always the elephant in the room, but actually it isn't the be-all and end-all, and people can be persuaded. I think I mentioned in the video as well about that health and safety piece, which I'm glad you used that, because I use that a lot to normalise where we are and the changes that we've seen, because it drives so much, and this is becoming very quickly a similar issue of scale. So that's quite interesting.
I think, Sarah, you touched on an interesting point, which is one that's plagued our industry for years and decades, is the perception of it's a laggard, it's built on tradition and heritage, and people are doing things or did things the way they did it. I think certainly this last 12 months, as you pointed out, Xavier, in terms of dealing with and coping with the pandemic, but even the 2 years prior to that, I think we've seen a huge pendulum shift on advancements in not just construction, but the AEC industry in general. And I think there are areas, though, that are stopping that because of some of those traditions. Like we sort of discussed this a little bit yesterday, that the way we're still building under the same bureaucracy, we're still building under the same contracts, we're still building under the same specifications in some case and terms and conditions, where that has to change and evolve as well to make sustainable building and make new materials be commonplace. Because once they become commonplace and they're known about and they're contracted, well, now you've kind of broken that last part of the equation.
Yeah, it's an interesting way you talk about the materials, right, James, about new materials. I even think we sometimes make a mistake by using old materials in new technologies. Like, for example, I would argue that 3D printing concrete is not concrete is not the best material to print with, right? I actually have and I actually was in a research group that did one of the first concrete printers, but 10 years later, I think we actually need to look at different types of materials to print with, because it's not ideal. So we need to always thinking ahead that we're not actually, why do we use concrete? Well, maybe because we were used to it, right? So maybe we should actually think really ahead of what we should be doing with it.
Well, we're going to be out of sand, aren't we, in the next couple of days? So, it's a big question of whether we use concrete. I mean, there's some long-term real problems with using concrete in that, but the 3D printed concrete, I've got to say, I think I'm a little bit at odds with that. And it's about application, because we talked a lot about timber. I think timber absolutely need to leverage a lot more of that in buildings. But for civil infrastructure, a lot of it is, we're building stuff that just sits in the ground or is a bridge. And I'm not going to see too many timber bridges to the scale of the one behind me. Do you know what I mean? There is an application thing. So I think for us, and it's something that you might have seen with the BAM Vapor Biomix project with the 3D printed concrete that's been developed in the Netherlands, and we're starting to see projects adopt that already, which is really good. It's about volume reduction, because one of the key problems with concrete is you have to build a mold, you pour it, and a lot of the actual structural mass of it is redundant. You don't actually need it. All you're doing is creating something that sits there. So, things like the 3D printed process, you can just get rid of a lot of the mass, be much more lean with it, and by virtue of doing that, then you make it cheaper and more efficient and lower carbon. So I'm pro 3D printed concrete for that, and just obviously with the building side, perhaps a little bit more focus on timber and more natural products. And there was even something I saw the other day actually about steel that was going to be like a recycled plastic constituent, so that you're seeing these kind of composite polymers coming out which replace steel. So that's an interesting one to explore, and who knows where graphene's going to take us in 2030. So exciting times, definitely.
Definitely. I'm trying to be a good moderator and not profusely agree with all of you, because I do very much share your views. Now, as to anyone that's watching, we've got a lot of comments coming in the Q&A. Please do get your questions in. We're going to try and answer as many of them as we can. If we can't answer them here, we will endeavour to email you. So please keep those questions coming in. It's just fantastic to see your responses coming in. Just before we open up to the kind of the main floor side, there's just a couple of other things I want to touch on briefly, and those couple of other things happen to be enormous industry issues, but we'll see how we do. I want to kind of talk about this theme of automation, because we mentioned throughout the film and throughout the introduction today the rise of automation in response to the need for more buildings, the need for efficiency, and that skills crisis. That sounds really exciting to some people. The idea of robots and AI is really cool. It's exciting stuff, but it absolutely terrifies some other people who fear for jobs being taken away, them being done out of a job by a robot potentially. Is there cause for concern there? Do people need to be concerned, or is there little to worry about?
I'm going to answer this one with a bit more of a question or a probe here to say, the construction industry, again, is concerned about this, but what we need to do is also look outside of our own industry to influences from other industries that have 100% adopted rapid prototyping and automation and mass assemblies and things like that, to see, you talk about aeronautical or automotive or manufacturing, where now you're talking higher quality products made inside a sustainable factory under perfect conditions, where you're getting much longer lifespan out of a much better product. But you still need, again, the skills for the people to be able to work there, program that, give their expertise, give their industry knowledge, so I think again, if we look outside our own industry, we're doing a lot of these things very well as a planet, where we are extending lives of cars and other things and manufactured products. So and again, under the climates we're currently in with COVID, where we've got sensitivity on social distancing and environmental thoughts and our own personal culture of our employees and well-being, these types of environments, or having a robot go in and do your drywalling instead of you, because it's 3 stories down, there's no light, it can work 24 hours a day. Brilliant. I think they're great things. So I think there's always human concern to something that looks like it's a change, and the first thought is to go to, you're putting me out of a job. But really, again, why think to the companies that have exiting staff right now? You're letting so much quality and knowledge and industry expertise walk out the door by not having trained coming on new staff. that you could do the exact same thing when you think of switch to automation. You need industry expertise and knowledge and decades of all that information to help program, develop these things, and so on and so forth. So to me, I don't think we should be afraid of it. I think we should look outside of our own industry, and we should embrace what is going to be, again, a necessity for ever increasing demand on built environment.
Indeed. I mean, Xavier, what do you think? Do we need to be scared of robots taking our jobs?
Depends which jobs, right? So I think in construction, you'll see in offsite manufacturing, I think that will really, really grow. Robotics on site is a very tricky one to solve. What we see a few bits happening, like spot robots from Boston Dynamics with scanners on their back. That, I think, drones on site, yes. But actual construction robotics on site is actually very, very tricky, I think. Sarah, you can probably comment on that as well, because the site continuously changes. A site is not a factory. A factory is a very controlled environment. The moment you move robotics onto a site, wow, that is very, very tricky, you know. But I think automation, we always think of automation in robotics and automation in construction itself. But I think there's an automation design happening as well. There's a lot of design tools coming out there, AI-driven design tools that will automate certain processes. What I must say, the process that it automates, AI always automates something that has been done before, right? I'm a strong believer that an AI can't really invent something completely new out of the box. Like general AI, that's decades and decades away. But I'm talking about AI that, you know, you give an input for an AI about a layout of a resi project. You give them thousands and millions of these layouts. It will be able to then start to do a layout. It already exists, right? There are tools out there. So if your job is that, well, yeah, then your job might be a bit of risk if you just kind of box standard draw these things out or design them. But a comment on that, I would say, is architects and designers, that's not really our task. Our task is really design for me is not drawing these things up and figuring out the composition of it. Our task is really thinking about what it is to live maybe in a post-COVID environment. I think design for me is coming up with the ideas. And actually, that for me is a central thing of design. So I think, I hope we actually are able to get more creative and actually have more time to think and actual design than just drawing.
Sure. It's more than just pretty pictures. I think you made some great points there, Xavier. Design really needs to be cut back from just a task of pen and paper and AutoCAD and lines to actually something a lot more creative. The thing about the jobs, I mean, I'm a really good case in point, I think, because I'm happy to share with people. I used to be a bricklayer, so I know what trade is like. I know exactly how that process goes, and something that I tell school kids if I go in and do STEM talks about construction and try and get them interested. One of my absolute key messages is be flexible with yourself. Don't try and lock yourself into a certain thing at that young age. I think the kids are put enough pressure as it is to make decisions that, you know, when they're sort of coming up to the end of the school years about the careers they want to take. And my message to them is just be flexible, because the jobs that you'll be doing 5-10 years time will not exist in the day that you make the decision about, like now. You know, that's a very good thing to sort of bear in mind, I think, for the youth of today. So automation's probably not going to take people's jobs, but they just get redeployed into doing something more interesting, I feel.
I think on that point, so I mean, I personally, a case in point as well, I left school. I mean, it's a bit different. It's not really construction. I left school in 2004 and YouTube was founded in 2005. You know, we now employ a group of people that have, you know, paid job roles and salaries and stuff. And had I said to my careers manager, I'm going to run a YouTube company, he would have thought to appear later on. New roles appear later on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, an interesting point. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
I was just to say, I think an interesting point to Sarah's, the continuation of Sarah's point, is also the exiting or the youth of today are also being skilled in newer things and technologies. And my son's doing programming at 10 years old. They're coming out digitally ready now. So the challenges that they're going to be facing aren't necessarily the challenges we think we're all going to be facing, because many of the youth that are entering into these industries now are already so much more digitally equipped to move into that industry than we were, or I go back a decade or 2 decades ago. So it's an interesting point that we're so concerned about what automation and digitalization should be, when actually the world is demanding it in terms of what we're looking to try to build, and the expertise or the knowledge that we're having coming into the workplace actually is already more equipped to do that.
Absolutely. We're going to open the discussion up to the floor in a moment, because we have the virtual floor, because we have a lot of people, a lot of comments coming in. I just want to ask one more question about to the panel about the video, because we talk about paperless construction sites, and that may feel like a piece of low-hanging fruit. It may feel like the way we've been going for the last 10 years or so, it's a complete no-brainer. We should all be doing it today. Why aren't we seeing paperless construction sites widespread today? Why isn't it just the way that every site's operating? And how do we overcome that hurdle in 2030? I'm looking to James, obviously, first of all.
I mean, I'll go back to the stat I said earlier. The 13 to 15% are still building off paper, which is crazy. Again, I think tradition is there's always a printed set somewhere on site, blah, blah, blah. And again, it goes to the bureaucracy where legally it was required to have multiple sets. If you work with the EPA, which is hilarious and awful to think, but it wasn't too long ago, they required multiple printed sets when doing a airport mitigation project. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're the EPA. What? This is a bit counterintuitive. So I think it's a mindset shift. And again, I think it's educating. It goes back to education. It's educating those that are actually working on site, the ones that think they're needing to use a printed set the most, that are adverse to saying, well, pick up an iPad or pick up a tablet or go into a trailer, go for a digital lockbox that's in the middle of the construction site right now, where you can get not only the information and access to the information you think you need, which is a printed plan, you're now getting access to data, to BIM models, to specifications, you can probably watch an assembly video right there on your device. So I think it's breaking that barrier that people have a misconception that I can only build off a plan because that's all I know how to do. Every person on a job site right now knows how to look at their phone and watch a YouTube video or go look something up. So it's no different. I think it's just breaking that perception and educating people that it's not necessary to have printed plans, because there's so much more to gain from it. You will go beyond construction phase and go into O&M and facilities management. You've got the same access to the same data to help you live with that built asset for then the next generation.
I mean, Sarah, you know construction sites inside out. Why isn't this just the way we do stuff?
I don't know if I claim to that one, but no, I know a little bit. I think, yeah, I can only really echo what James said on that. Education, mindset, tradition, all of that, and the technology's here today to do that. We have had examples in our business where we've had some very strong-willed project managers who have invested in that and gone absolutely to town with digital, getting the tables, getting the huge kind of AO-sized tables. It's all digital top and that kind of thing, and everybody has an iPad by default. Yet on the other side, you've still got people who struggle just to get an iPad because the perception is it costs money. So it's like, why? No, just stop talking about why the iPad costs money and start talking about the admin savings and the efficiencies you'll gain, which are the flip side. So there's definitely a mindset challenge, I think, still to overcome, and some of that will be generational. So probably by 2030, it'll be the norm, definitely.
I was going to say, it's not just the printing costs and the environmental considerations. It's the cost of something going wrong on a construction site because you've built off the wrong information. I was there on my trainee placement year in 2006, stood there with my then kind of site manager swearing because a concrete kicker had been built wrong because the physical drawing he had in his hand was not the drawing the architect had back at the office. And I remember going home that night and thinking, well, this is so simple. How can that happen on buildings that we all live in and use? But it did, and it still does. So the push for paperless, I think, there's a lot of value there. And again, I think it's about getting it out to the industry and education. Now we're going to open up to the floor. We've got a lot of questions to try and get through. We're going to get through as many of them as we can. So we're going to try and be a bit more quicker fire with our panel. First one, bit of a massive one. how do we build more sustainably when clients procuring projects will tend to focus on the initial capital costs rather than the long-term running costs? Easily a 2-hour debate on its own. Who would like to kick us off?
I think education is going to be a resounding word throughout all of this webinar. I think in some cases, Xavier brought it up, in some cases the clients just don't know. They simply don't know. They think they know, but they have no idea. In some cases, the clients aren't the ones that are owning or operating that asset for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I think, again, it comes to us as the people that work in the industry or are the providers, the solutions providers, or the informers to the client to say, have you thought about this? Who is FMing this? How are you FMing it? What data do you need? What are you thinking about for long-term costs? So yeah, education, I think, is how we need to get over that. And proof points. We have the data to prove that it is more successful. You can build a building better, cheaper, and that will have lower running costs by 8-10%. I mean, that should be a no-brainer to any client that's trying to open their wallet at that point.
Yeah, I think we had situations where we had we went to a naturally ventilated building, and we actually did the analysis and figured out it was actually cheaper to design it like that. So then it's very easy to convince your client, right? You don't need to convince them to save the planet. It is just cheaper. And I think there's so many, but you as designers and all that, we have to do the research and actually look into it. And as you say, James, the data is there. We just need to look for it and show it.
Absolutely. Probably the only extra thing to add is probably just to educate the stakeholders and the shareholders. They're ultimately the ones who are paying for this. And, in some cases, that's the taxpayer. Pretty much it always is for public sector type stuff. So, we're accountable to ourselves almost. So the pressure can come full circle in some respects, but we can do that. It's incumbent upon us to lift that knowledge base of the decision makers.
Interesting question now from one of our viewers. Surely automation will actually increase carbon and energy footprint of construction. Is it not better to focus on upskilling people?
Mm-hmm. Not sure about that one. Depends what country you're in, really. Because if you're in France, you've got full nuclear kind of energy. So if everything's electric, fine, you're going to be okay. Whatever your views are on nuclear, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who've got polarized opinions on what that is. If you're in Germany, maybe not so great because it's all coal. But yeah, I think that's unequivocally proven with the data that automation is less energy intensive than people. Because you've got to move people about. You've got to service that person. It's not just a resource that does nothing. It needs to be fed, it needs to be watered, it needs to be looked after, welfare, all this sort of thing. So you don't need any of that with a robot. You just need to feed it some electricity. So I think that's okay, that one.
I think we're seeing great examples where people are building in much more innovative ways, and then actually the output of that. Again, I'm thinking of things like gigafactories and Tesla or Amazon, where they're powering nearby towns, they're heating nearby towns. Where again, it's that sort of public. Fred, thank God you do what you do, because we do a really bad job of promoting how amazing this industry is and what amazing impacts it can have. We see a lot of the negative, but we don't see a lot of the great publicized advantages and gains. And I think by educating people more on that, you'll start to see people understanding why this is just a no-brainer.
So, another question. What role do you see digital twins playing in construction and the built environment by 2030? It's obviously big buzzword at the minute. Is lots of people doing it or not doing it quite as well as other people. Xavier, have you had much experience with this, and what kind of role do you see it playing?
I do, and I think I don't think it's a technology thing, really. Digital twin, it's I find it I think it's procurement. It's a way of procuring, right? What I would love to see is that we get tools where we can easily, from early design stages, that can then actually morph from later stages, and actually the data go from the early tools into maybe detailed design, into construction, that there is a really kind of a smooth translation of data between all these platforms. That doesn't happen yet. You know, I think that is a really important thing, that contractors, architects, engineers, we all work on different design platforms. And I don't see that being linked up yet. You know, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is how we procure buildings. I think that's the other main issue. That doesn't really let you, you know, transfer data over that easily.
I think another part to that, Xavier, and I don't know if you've noticed this in your own projects, I've certainly heard it from some client sides, but right now the pandemic is enforcing scope creep to existing projects. So I think what the digital twin or this type of build allows is it allows you to evaluate or jump scope very quickly and keep the project on task, and maybe even find better, more efficient ways of doing it, or better floor plan simulations and better modeling against something that you might need to very quickly pivot against. And again, I think we've seen examples where buildings have gone from mixed use to more resi now because COVID's kind of impacting what that might look like. So I think we can respond quicker and be more agile by using some of these tools too.
And I think it's definitely about communication, right? Like, I think the best projects, the most amazing projects I've worked on is projects where I had access to engineers, to contractors, and to fabricators super early on, right? So we can really, as an architect, you really kind of are dialed in to the construction process. And I've even had projects where I almost had a conversation with the guy running the CNC machine, because I needed to know certain things on how his machine ran the way I designed something. And I think that is, you know, I hope with this way that we're all connected better now, hopefully these things will actually happen more.
Well, I mean, what you're describing there, Xavier, should be an absolute no-brainer, shouldn't it? I mean, I can remember describing to my friends down the pub a few years ago who asked me, what is all this BIM stuff? What does it mean? And I would say, well, it's basically a way of making sure that everybody involved in the project gets all the information they need and understands it before they go and build it. And they sort of looked at me as if to say, well, so you don't all talk to each other at the beginning? You don't have that, you know, those conversations that early on. And it's madness, isn't it? It's not the way we should be doing it. I
think as well, there's probably a change that we're starting to see in the way that clients procure project. I know the procurement is still a bit of a big issue for the building side, because it tends to be big private consortiums, but for the civils infrastructure, we've seen a massive shift to more longer term collaborative relationships with those public sector clients, which is super helpful. So just as you said there, Xavier, it's all about everyone around the table. We have very close working relationships throughout, you know, right the way through from designs through to the customers and actually end users as well. So that's a huge improvement on where we were, but we're still lacking on the common data environment part. I think there's still a lot of people who've got a lot of ideas about which one's the best to go with, and we're still probably in that discovery phase about which is the best between your sort of Autodesks and your Bentleys and all of this. It's a tough space, but
at least we're having that conversation. That's
exactly. It is a start, absolutely. You know, I think that will resolve itself fairly quickly as we get more proficient analysts coming through who understand back-end data structures. Perhaps they can resolve some of these issues. Even if the front ends look different, I think the back ends to everything we store in the data environment are going to be more common in the near future.
I think, speaking on behalf of a software provider, it should be that they should also be listening and doing more proactively about this. It should be about the data. It should be about data agnosticity. It should be about bringing data together and allowing it to flow so that the right tool can access the right data to give you the right result. And that, I think, is where there are great coalitions that have come together to help enforce that and work with the industry.
I completely agree, James. It's about not losing sight of the fundamental objective as well, which is making sure that everybody involved in a project has access to the information they need at the right time in the right format. That's fundamentally what we're trying to do. And I think sometimes we get bogged down, as you say, in processes and which software is right and which one's wrong and how we're going to implement it and all the rest of it. But that fundamental goal of we just want the people building this to have the right information is one we need to kind of not lose sight of. Now, one more question from the audience, if we can, or maybe a couple more. Do you think that organisations like LEED, BREEAM, the BRE, I guess, national governments and their regulations, do you think they're doing enough to drive construction forward and move it to where it needs to be by 2030?
Well, I think there's a lot of emphasis on the labels, that's for sure. They certainly ring around the place throughout construction done. Everyone's kind of chasing the badge in some respects, and without perhaps considering what that entails. So there's a bit of badge chasing there. What do they do? I think as a function, potentially the processes that they make you do, essentially to answer against all the criteria that these certificates enable. That in of itself opens conversations with people, just like we've been doing here, with people who wouldn't ordinarily have those conversations. So you need to speak to project manager about the type of drainage solution they're having. Does it sort of tick all the boxes for SUDS and all this sort of thing? Without those labels, you might not have those discussions. So there is a value proposition coming through in terms of that education and lifting that part. But more often than not, potentially the cynic in me see it as a bit of a label sometimes, and it's, we need to keep pushing the standards. And within that, I'd also extend that to things like the CDP as well. There's a lot of label chasing organisations going for that sort of thing. So there's a lot of narrative behind that, but where's the real actions? What is happening? So.
I mean, just in defence of the label chasing, that's kind of inherently human nature a little bit. Is it not that those organisations understand that and they know that people are going to aspire to a label, but in doing that over the course of 5 years, they move a whole industry forward generally in terms of how it thinks and operates? Or am I being too kind?
I think
not at all.
Back to Xavier there as well, where it's communication and transparency. As long as this is seen as a democratized, that we're doing this for the right reasons, and that every label is doing it to push the industry forward and innovate and make sure that we're getting to a common end goal, then it's an amazing thing. And those labels open doors. They change contracts. They affect the end product. So I think as long as the communication is there with every party, with the solutions providers, with the firms that are actually doing it, with the contractors, with the industry, with the public sector, then great. It's going to come out to move in the right direction. But it's when everything stays siloed and people are just trying to innovate as much as they can innovate and enforce whatever they can without, in a siloed environment, that's never going to work.
I agree. It's going to be it's an interesting time. I think there's going to be that mixture of regulation pull, but also context push, which is going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. We are literally inundated with your questions, guys. So thank you so much for all the things coming in. Lots of praise for the panelists and the B1M and the video as well. So I really appreciate that. We can't read them out as questions because that would be us just wallowing in glory. But we'll try and get through just one more. People asking about the rise of timber construction, saying it's one thing in more northern countries like the US, Europe, where there are positioned closer to sustainably managed forests, but there are huge cities being built in Nigeria, in the Middle East, in India, in China. Do those places still have the right to use timber construction? And if they're having to transport it great distances, is that kind of defeating the object a little bit with carbon emissions?
Well, absolutely. It's not a solution for everywhere on the planet. Absolutely not. You need to look at what materials are available and most sustainable in that location, right? So, and if we tomorrow will turn every single building into solid timber construction, well, that's not going to happen either, because we don't have enough sustainable forests. So it's a simple answer. Yeah, of course not. But I think there's a huge chunk that we can actually change into from concrete and steel into timber, but absolutely not a solution for every location. Rammed earth is a really interesting construction material. I love it. And that is applicable in all locations. So we just have to think a little bit further than what are the traditional materials and why are we actually using this? Is it just because we're used to it, or is it because it really makes sense? I think we just have to go back to first principles always, not just do what we've done before, but just ask us the big questions at the beginning of a project. What is the right thing to do in that location?
I think, Xavier, you said it earlier as well, where sometimes it's trying to force a round peg into a square hole, where we're either trying to apply current workflow philosophies against brand new technology or aged technology, and sometimes it's not the desired outcome. It needs to be what is the best solution at the time. And timber is immense, it's amazing, but in other areas, again, I think, Sarah, you'd mentioned different types of polymer construction. Like, there are other alternatives. we tend to grasp on new things. Digital twin, this, AR, augmented reality was a couple of years ago. So it's like timber, everything's going to be timber. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, again, it's the application, I think, is huge. And that's going to come down to education, educating the person that says it's got to be timber. Well, why? Have you really thought about this? You can't build in this ground condition. The timber will be destroyed or whatever it might be. So I think it's a huge point of don't always force the round peg into the square hole. Think about the application and think about the long-term use, and again, educate as to why this is not the right solution.
Yeah, it's such a good point, isn't it? It's about you got to have a blend of solutions, and anyone you talk to in the climate space, if they're telling you that there's one size fits all, they probably want to sell you something. That's simple as that. They want to change the world, so that's not helpful to anybody. It needs to be a blend of solutions. It needs to be fit for purpose, definitely.
They'll also be out of business very soon if they think that.
Yeah, no, it would be one of these kind of bubbles, wouldn't it? Pump and dump, I think they call it in the shares and stocks environment. Yeah. So I echo what you both said on that. Material choices has to go hand in hand with location. I think just do it sustain, and not only that, but just build circular. We build stuff that can be used again. I absolutely love trawling the reclaim yards for stuff. If I'm doing little projects around, it has to be, build stuff that can be reused again. Buildings as material banks. Same for civils.
I think, Sarah, you might have had the quote of the webinar there with that. If someone's selling you it's one size fits all, they're trying to sell you something. We may have had the soundbite. Guys, we've been absolutely inundated with your questions coming in. I would love absolutely nothing more than to sit here and chat about this for the next 3 hours, believe me. It's something I'm passionate about. But unfortunately, we are going to have to start wrapping up. I just want to ask each of the panelists, just stepping back from all this, for people who maybe just joined the construction industry or who are working in the construction industry today, we've all lived through 2020 and the roller coaster year that it's been. We look at these challenges that we're setting out over the next 10 years, and it can all just feel pretty depressing and pretty daunting. What would you say to those people? What would you say to people who, to be honest, feel quite daunted by the next decade?
I would say, if you just join the construction industry, wherever you are, with whatever position, however junior, I think you can make a difference, a big difference. And it's just to have a voice as well. And I think there's so many tools out there and ways to so many social media, whatever it is, there's a way to really take action, I would say. So don't believe because you wherever in a company that you can't have a voice. I think you should. And we should all thrive to work towards a more sustainable future, because this industry really affects climate change, really does. So it's up to us.
I would say there is no better industry that you could have such an overwhelming sense of pride where you walk past something, drive past something, see it, where there's a tangible object you've played a part in building or being part of designing or operating. I mean, it is physically, you have an impact on the landscape, which is immense. And there's not a lot of industries or jobs that allow you to be that impactful. And again, now when you bring into the equation that you could have probably the most dramatic swing and impact on the environmental side of the industry as well and be part of that journey. And then you see these amazing advancements. It's not like you're going to, no disrespect if that's how you started, Sarah, love that idea. But if it's not just you going and slinging mud or putting a brick together, there are so many different things. We all represent maybe the echelon of technological advancements within the industries, which I think is amazing. But that's all the way down through the industry. We're so ready and poised to adapt new technologies that the new entering youth or talent can probably adapt to so many different ways of getting a really fulfilling industry, a really fulfilling career in this industry.
Some great points, and I think my key thing is for people to challenge their biases on a lot of this, and that goes hand in hand with all the stuff we talked about with education. The human being becomes familiar with something that says, okay, that worked, I'll do it again, and that's very deep rooted in our brains to do that. So challenge your biases, listen to your sustainability professionals who live and breathe that aspect of it to actually ensure that we don't sort of breach the planet's capacity for us. So
what a fantastic set of inspirational comments to end on. I just want to thank you guys so much, not just for being part of the video and being part of this panel debate today, but also for what you do in the industry, because your minds, your attitude, the way you think, and the many other people like you is what moves this industry forward. So on behalf of me, everyone watching, and the industry, just huge thanks to all three of you for what you do, because we are very, very grateful. Big thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. I'm sorry that I can't sit here for 2 hours and talk to you, because I would absolutely love to do that. Thanks for your questions. We'll endeavour to answer any that we haven't answered on email. Don't forget, you can also get involved on social media with the hashtag #BuildIn2030. There's lots of information there on Twitter. And also, of course, as if we couldn't forget, the main documentary, How to Build in 2030, is now free to watch. It's up there on YouTube. It's across all of our social media. It's on the b1m.com. As I said, I'm terribly biased because it's kind of my video, but I would recommend anyone in construction or interested in the future of our planet takes 10 minutes in this socially distanced lockdown world to watch that video and just reflect on what it means for the future. So massive thank you to all our panelists, and a huge thank you to everyone that's joining today. We'll see you soon.